y'all, it's me again. I'm gonna continue reading from my book, Secret Lives of the First Ladies, okay? Here we go. First mate. When John Adams wrote to his wife, pleading for her to join him in France, Abigail was hesitant. Granted, she wished more than anything to be reunited with her husband, but she had never been away from home before, and dreaded the perils of an Atlantic crossing, storms, green drinking water, cramped quarters, pirates, and so on. Nevertheless, on June 18, 1784, she and her daughter Nabby boarded the Active, bound for England, where John promised to meet them to accompany them to the continent. They brought 2 servants and a cow with them. The seasickness started almost immediately and remained for days. The passengers' condition was exaggerated by the ship's cargo of whale oil and potash, which I don't know what that is, which tossed the ocean's waves and infused the entire vessel with a stagnant reek. Abigail and Nabby shared 2 tiny compartments with another woman and were forced to keep the doors open at night for ventilation, which exposed them in their nightclothes to the crew and male passengers. Oh, well, at least they were better off than the cow they brought, who was so badly injured by a storm that it had to be killed and tossed overboard. Ooh. The Active eventually made it to calm waters, which finally meant an end to seasickness. But Abigail had barely recovered before she started taking control of the ship. The cook, according to her, was a lazy, dirty Negro with no more knowledge of his business than a savage. She proceeded to take him under her wing, teach him his crafting, and did some of the food preparation herself. Then she moved on to the rest of the ship. Horrified by the lingering stench, she got down on her hands and knees and scrubbed the vessel from stem to stern. By the time the vessel made it to England, the captain was convinced that Abigail wanted his job. The Addams family. No, just kidding. Abigail loved her children, perhaps to death. She wrote to her son John Quincy in 1770 after he went to Europe to begin the diplomatic career that would eventually take him to the presidency, that I had much rather you should have found your grave in the ocean you have crossed, or any untimely death crop you in your infant years, rather than see you an immoral profligate or a graceless child. John Quincy would achieve greatness, but his siblings weren't quite so lucky. Being a child of such exacting parents as John and Abigail could be harsh. Charles and Thomas both died from alcoholism. Nabby was convinced by her parents to forego the love of her life, who went on to become a successful playwright, to marry her father's secretary, Colonel William Smith, who never provided enough for his wife and family. Nabby died at 48 from breast cancer. Abigail relied on her high standards to sustain her at the darkest moment. As she wrote to her sister upon the death of Charles, "Weep with me over the grave of a poor unhappy child who cannot now add another pang to those which have pierced my heart for several years." Turkey talk. Abigail Adams had been raised to speak her opinion, a quality that her husband relished. But when John Adams was elected to the highest office in the land, Abigail wondered if her mouth would get her in trouble. After all, her only predecessor as First Lady was Martha Washington, who, like most 18th century women, had kept her place, which wasn't in the sphere of politics. Abigail wrote to her husband that she was aware of the prudence of following Lady Washington's example, but that she'd rather be bound, gagged, and shot like a turkey. The laundry on the hill. John and Abigail Adams were the first presidential couple to occupy what would eventually become known as the White House. But when they took up residence in 1799, the new structure was a far cry from the splendid landmark we know today. Much of it had yet to be finished. It was dramatically understaffed, and the mansion even lacked stairways. Abigail made the most of a bad situation, but it showed. She was forced to hang the laundry in the building's reception area, now the East Room, where every government caller could see it. All the President's Wife, Martha Jefferson, 1749 to 1782. By the time she met Thomas Jefferson, Martha Wales had already been married once to a successful lawyer named Bathurst Skelton. That union lasted only 2 years, and Martha was a widow at 20. She was a ravishing young Southern belle when the future president became smitten with her, and in addition to boasting an expensive education, she loved to play music. The quality that mostly drew her to violin playing Jefferson. They were married in 1772. Thomas bought her a piano and arranged for lessons from a music teacher, and the two spent long hours expressing their heartfelt devotion in duets that wowed guests. Martha's heart, however, wasn't nearly as extraordinary as her musical ability, and bearing 6 children only strained her frail physique further. Worse, only two of the kids lived beyond infancy. Patsy and Polly. With his wife's health failing daily, the music went out of Jefferson's life in more ways than one. His responsibilities to the Virginia Assembly and Continental Congress during the Revolution altered suffrage so that he could be near his dying wife. According to legend, he promised her not to remarry, remaining true to his word, despite notorious flings with Martha Causeway and a slave named Sally Hemings. Indeed, if we are to believe contemporary accounts and witnesses close to Jefferson, Martha's death left him utterly devastated. By the time he became president of the United States, Martha had gone 19 years, forcing Jefferson to rely on his daughters and Dolly Madison to imbue the White House with female grace during his administration. Chapter 3. Dolly Madison. May 20th, 1768 through July 12th, 1849. Married January 7th, 1790 to John Todd Jr. September 15th, 1794 to James Madison. Presidential husband, James Madison. Children, John Payne and William Temple, both with John Todd. First Lady, from 1809 through 1817. Astrological sign, Taurus. Religion, Quaker. Soundbite, our sex are ever losers when they stem the torrent of public opinion. In July of 1849, a graceful United States said goodbye to Dolly Madison in a funeral fit for an empress. Presiding over the event was President Zachary Taylor, whose words made a fitting capstone to the life of America's Queen Mother. She will never be forgotten because she was truly our first lady for a half century. It was the first use of the term First Lady, and appropriately so, for Dolly Madison was, and perhaps still is, the summa inter pares of presidential spouses. Though born in North Carolina, Dolly Payne grew up on her family's plantation near Ashland, Virginia. As Quakers, the Paynes deliberately avoided participation in the Revolutionary War. The peaceful egalitarian sect also opposed slavery, a fact that finally drove Dolly's father, John, to free his slaves in 1783 and take the family north of Philadelphia. His piety and progressive politics were rewarded with bankruptcy and humiliation. Within 6 years, his nascent starch business went belly up, compelling the Quaker community to disown him for fouling up his finances. He died 3 years later. Fortunately for Dolly, she had already found another means of support. John Todd Jr., a fellow Quaker with a successful law practice. The two were married in 1790 and had 2 children and lived a comfortable life among Philadelphia's elite. The dream soon turned into a nightmare. Yellow fever struck Philadelphia in October of 1793, subjecting the city to a calamity of biblical proportions. Heroically, John Todd decided not to flee, as so many others did, including much of the federal government, and offered his legal counsel to the dying and widowed. This decision cost him his life. The Todd's youngest son, William Temple, was also struck down. Dolly succumbed to fever, but recovered. The 25-year-old widow now drew on her late husband's wealth to raise their remaining son, John Paintal. Dolly continued to make a splash in society and drew attention with her gregarious and kindly nature. Though largely ignorant of practical matters, she relied on legal and financial advice from a coterie of male admirers who flew to her like moths to flame. One of them was Aaron Burr, who introduced her to a friend of his named James Madison. Madison was a genius, to be sure. He had written George Washington's speeches, impressed even the great Thomas Jefferson with his breadth of learning, and contributed as much as anyone, perhaps more than anyone, to the creation of the country's Constitution. He was also a sickly, withdrawn little thing, in almost every way the opposite of the chatty, extroverted Dolly. They fell hard for each other, nevertheless, and were married in 1794. It was more than the beginning of a warm and very successful marriage. It was also the birth of a new Dolly, for shortly after the wedding, her fellow Quakers gave her the boot for marrying outside the faith, and Dolly, free to act upon her unrestrained proclivities, threw off her modest Quaker duds and never looked back. Thanks to her magnificent turbans and scandalously low-cut gowns, Dolly Madison reigned as the White House's first fashion diva. Her introduction to official government hosting came earlier than expected when James, whom Dolly called her Little Jimmy, became Secretary of State in 1801. Because both President Jefferson and Vice President Burr were widowers, Dolly became the de facto female voice of the administration. She rose to the occasion with gusto and panache. Dinners at the Madison residence were gay affairs indeed, thanks in large part to Dolly's gift for gab and deft social choreography. Jimmy even had her sit at the head of the table, where she could direct conversation towards subjects that would engage all and offend none. Such experience served her well when, in 1809, she became the First Lady in title as well as practice. She had more public seasoning under her gown than any previous presidential spouse, and it showed. Schooled in the Jeffersonian tradition of entertaining, in which the aristocratic was shunned in favor of the simple and Republican, Dolly knew how to throw a party. Gone were the stilted levies of her predecessors, full of bowing, humorless courtiers. At Dolly's affairs, people mingled, joked, laughed, and treated themselves to ice cream. The first delicacy that Jefferson had introduced her to, the kindly, buxom hostess could be seen everywhere, dressed to the nines and offering a smile and a handshake to Senator and servant alike, while Jimmy ensconced himself in a corner to murmur over grave issues with colleagues. Dolly's smoothing, galvanized relationship assuaged the rancor of political foes. As Henry Clay put it, everybody loves Mrs. Madison. Dolly replied, that's because Mrs. Madison loves everybody. Such graces were indispensable not only to her husband. Dolly once got two congressmen, John Eapes and John Randolph, to call off their duel over a nasty political argument. Dolly didn't even let military conflict dampen her spirits. When war broke out in 1812 with England, the First Lady found herself mulling beyond her back for a pacifist Quaker background. She made a point of correcting such misrepresentations by fully and publicly supporting her husband. It worked, perhaps too well. At a victory celebration, the son of the Secretary of the Navy chose to lay the flag of a captured British ship at Dolly's feet rather than at her husband. She proceeded to blush, perhaps as a result of overstating the demeanor of the president. After getting chased out of Washington by an invading British army in 1814, Dolly merely brushed the dust off her clothes, returned to the gutted capital, took up residence with Jimmy in a private home, and started entertaining him. Besides, 1850 brought peace and victory, and more celebrations for her victorious husband, who is now the toast of the town. She even found time to organize relief for war orphans. After Jimmy completed his secretary, the Madison moved to his Virginia estate a multiplier. The allure of Washington, however, never waned for Dolly. Upon her husband's death in 1836, she moved back to the capital to resume her role as first entertainer of the land, and was even granted an honorary seat in Congress by a unanimous vote, no less. She remained at the heart of Washington society, a tangible and beloved link to the country's founding father, the Diane, who was allowed to send the signature in the new Morse code after Samuel Morse himself, of course, who helped President Polk lay the cornerstone of the future Washington monument. Until her death in 1849, it was customary for newly inaugurated presidents to call on the Queen Mother and receive her blessing. Please rate, comment, and subscribe down below. And if you're on YouTube, please ring that bell notification so that you can know when I upload. And if you're on TikTok, please like and follow my videos. And please pay for something on my eBay and or Mercari, okay? Well, bye.